Welcome to Serve Nebraska's budgeting sessions. This is budgeting for Section 3 of the grant, which is indirect and administrative costs. This is the final section of the budget, and you want to make sure that you're looking at the directions because there's considerable match that you can utilize based on correct understanding. A common mistake is that programs miscalculate the match and they calculate 10% of the budgeted match, not 10% of the total cost, which is federal and grantee share. So that's a really important part. There's two different pieces where you can look at your budget. Again, you want to think strategically in terms of looking at the match for your grant. So again, looking at Section 3, which is administrative or indirect costs, there's two ways to recover, and this really depends on your organization and your organizational structure. First, there's the fixed 5% method. This is outlined in the regulations, and you can find further information at 45 CFR 2521.95. Again, you are limited to 5% of the total funds expended. Math and algebra allows you to multiply 5.26% of the total Section 1 and 2. And when you add the budget, it will be mathematically 5% of the total grant. So that's really how you want to calculate the federal share in Section 3. To get the match or grantee share of Section 3, you want to take 10% of all direct costs. So that's 10% of the federal share plus 10% of the grantee share and multiply that by 0.10 so that would be 10% of total direct costs. One of the great things is because this fixed amount is allowed in the regulations, there is no supporting documentation for this allocation. Yes, you heard me correctly. There is no requirement as long as you stay mathematically when you're doing your reimbursements that you do not request more than 5% of federal funds or match more than 10% of total grants. So again, this is something that you clearly want to understand because it could benefit your program considerably by looking at that method. For organizations that might have a federally approved negotiated indirect cost rate, some people know them as NICRA or ICA. The second part is if you have a negotiated indirect cost rate, you still are limited to 5% of the federal share. Again, both methods give the grantees cost recovery of 5% of total federal funds, which again is 5.2% of Sections 1 and 2. The difference if you have a federally approved indirect cost rate is you multiply total Section 1 plus Section 2 minus the amount in the federal indirect cost, which is the 5%, and then multiply that by your indirect cost rate. Again, indirect cost rates vary from program to program. Some indirect cost rates are based on staffing. Some indirect cost rates are based on total costs. So you want to apply the balance of the indirect costs as match. Again, it is probably does not make sense if you only have an AmeriCorps grant to go through the process of negotiating a federal rate. So you have the fixed rate, or you can use your indirect cost rate. Another part, just to give you some information, is the DeMinimis rate as part of the uniform guidance. That is outlined in 2 CFR 200.68. Again, the federal regulations allow for 10% of modified indirect costs. Modified indirect costs include direct salaries, fringe benefits, materials, supplies, services, travel, and the first $25,000 of subawards. Modified total direct costs do not include equipment, capital expenditures, charges for patient care, rental costs, participant support costs. So again, this is more of an FYI due to the fact that to get the modified total direct cost, you have to exclude Section 2 and the member living allowance, that this rate is actually less than the total rate that is allowed in the AmeriCorps regulation. So again, that this is more of an FYI and an explanation of why this rate is not used prevalently across AmeriCorps. And another important part is just to understand kind of what indirect and direct costs are. Direct costs are costs that are directly attributed to the program and meeting your goals and objectives. Examples include costs for members, costs for staff who train, recruit, or supervise members, member gear, costs for specific program evaluations that you might do for on your service, costs for travel or training. Indirect or administrative costs are general or centralized expenses related to the overall administration of an organization that is receiving assistance from AmeriCorps. Examples are accounting, auditing, general legal services, internal evaluations of the entire operations, general liability insurance, and salaries and benefits related to organizational management or financial support. So again, I think that if you think of understanding what costs go directly in sections 1 and 2, and we just learned how to properly do section 3 of your budget.